So welcome to another episode of Chess Up with the Chess Up board, Chess Up 2. This is episode 32, and we are hoping to have white pieces. The goal is to share some thoughts about the openings that I play, about the general gameplay. And today we are playing Botvinnik system. Botvinnik system is losing 6.5 to 7.5 to Vienna system, which I'm more familiar with. And today we might have the d5 move again. Black is playing bishop to b4. And albeit I respect the move, I'm not going to be worried about it just yet. We're going to do our development, and if we have a pair of bishops with no effort, I always take it. It's always a good thing to have. Knight on a6 could be potentially a weakness. White might want to go to c5, but we have always hitting the knight with the d4 pawn. So I'm not particularly worried about black's setup. Black is playing c6. Now, one thing is starting to be glaring, and that is the dark square weaknesses. And without the dark square bishop, we might think of placing the bishop on a3 to control all of these squares. It will also restrict potentially the knight jumping onto c5. And if we can settle the bishop onto d6, that could be really good position for that bishop. So we will try and play bishop a3. I think black's best option is to now strike in the center. But they like to be playing very provocatively with the move knight h6. The one thing that I can see, that knight would want to go to f5 at a certain point. So we are going to increase more pressure in the center with the move e4. Firstly, we are taking the knight's square from f5. And if e5 is played, now we are going with the plan that's going to be really torn in their backside probably. We would want to play bishop d6. Just need to evaluate how is that going to work, because if queen f6 hitting the bishop, we play c5 and they play b6, I can probably play move d4 and cement that bishop on d6, so it will restrict the black pieces quite considerably. And I believe this could work, so here we need to think a little bit deeper than usual. So bishop d6, queen f6, c5, b6, d4, e takes d4, c takes d4, b takes c5, d takes c5, queen c3 check. And then they will be able to win the pawn on c5. So tactically this doesn't seem to work. So bishop d6, queen f6, c5, b6, d4, e takes d4, oh no, actually d4, yeah, e takes d4, c takes d4, b takes c5, and then we have e5. If e d4, then we have e5. Keeping this bishop here is the priority. So we are going to go into this line. So queen f6 looks like one of the only moves that will protect the pawn on e5. Another pawn move that can be played is pawn to f6, protecting e5, with the idea of playing knight to f7, getting rid of this bishop here. But we are going into line queen f6. So we are going to lock the bishop on d6. Should restrict this bishop quite well, and then also this knight, potentially. So when we play d4, if they take, we will play e5 first and then take on d4. Either with a knight, with a queen, or with a pawn. I'm not yet decided which will be the best. So b6 happens and d4 happens. The problem we have with the move e5, that the knight f5 will be available to black again. But we can apply lots of pressure against the knight. What we also need is to develop our pieces as soon as possible. So that is to protect the king. So black is taking, and now the move that we wanted to play, but might not be the best move in the position. However, the most important here is going to be to develop, simply. Queen e6. So forget everything that I may told you before. We just need to keep on developing. And I think move knight e2 is the right way to develop. The pawns don't matter so much right this minute. What matters is how we develop our pieces. And I feel move knight d4 here comes really, really handy. Black might want to play queen c4. But we already have knight takes c6, winning the rook in a corner. Queen to g4. It also allows us to play knight takes c6 in a moment. But if we can help it, we will avoid the queen trades. So move like bishop f3 looks that's going to achieve this goal. Now we will be prevented from castling, but so is black at the moment. Queen to g5 happens. And I think it already gives us the license to kill. With the move knight takes e6. But black might want to play queen to d2. So where possible, avoid the trades. Avoid the trades of queen d2 check. So if we castle queen d2, queen a4, b5, knight takes b5, queen takes b5. We are threatening rook in the corner. If rook b8, we have bishop b8, knight b8, queen b8, pawn to c2 doesn't threaten us so much, and they can castle. I think here if I play knight takes c6 and they play queen d2, they will not be allowed to take on c6. So let's have a look. Knight takes c6, queen d2, king, pawn d2, king d2. They're not able to take on c6 back, so they may take b takes c5, which is trapping our knight. No, it's not trapping the knight. We can play knight to a5, hitting the rook, potentially winning the rook in the corner with the bishop b8. So knight takes c6, also there's knight f5, knight d4, knight takes, pawn takes. I think h4 is actually a good way to ask the queen where it's going to go. We are down 2 pawns, so black might want to be trading the queen on d2. But we have a really strong bind on the position with the move bishop d6, so black will have to waste some tempos. So they are going for the trade, which is reasonable. So I just need to prove that the compensation we have. So they're taking here, which is reasonable as well. And now it's our time to show the cards that we had prepared. Unfortunately, black can play knight to f5 here. And also bishop b7. I've completely missed this move. So yeah, despite all the drama, I think we have misplayed this a little bit. So the job is to now cut the damage. We will play knight f3, protecting the bishop, attacking their bishop. That's the only move that we have left in this position that I can see. So c takes d4 would be an obvious mistake. Rook b8 makes sense. And we have to trade the knights. We have to trade the bishops, there's no choice. Again, because if we move the knight, we will lose the bishop. If we... Oh, actually, black has missed something, and it's our powerhouse bishop. And I missed it too. So right now we should be winning straight up. They need to trade the bishop on f3 first. Now we take back. So we got something at least. That bishop on d6 was pressuring a lot. Now we can start banging the drums slowly. Just not an easy position to unravel. So first, I would suggest develop the rook from the corner, and that rook will be strongest perhaps on c1, on d1 as well. Perhaps on d1, that rook will be strong there. So first we need to attack the pawn. As I expect, I will have to eventually make some defensive move like king e2, protecting this pawn. Maybe I can sacrifice that pawn as well. I would definitely want to have this rook here to attack that pawn over there. And rook c1 was aimed exactly for this reason, so black will play knight a6, trying to protect that pawn. Now we are going to try attack this pawn as well. So we're gonna put this rook here. Castling is perfect for us. And now we are going to put all sorts of pressure on black pieces, and we are going to win some material straight away. So rook defends passively, which is never too good for them. We're going to attack their knight. If knight goes to b4, which is like the most expected move, we'll still have very strong moves of our own. The king went to e2, by the way, just so the knight g4 doesn't happen. So I don't see any checks or any bad moves that can happen to us from this knight. So we are going to take the pawn. So here you will be able to see the potential technique that you can deploy with the two rooks. Now I hope you see the next move that's coming. This is going to be to hit their rook with our rook. They cannot take for rook c8 checkmate. So they will need to make some substitute moves for now. So one of them is rook to b8. And we can definitely we can do two things here. One of them is to threaten the knight, and I believe that's the best way to go. Again, the knight doesn't have any useful checks as we are covering with the rook c. So we are going to take the pawn, attacking the knight. Rook b2 again looks like could be a slight mistake. If knight b4 happens, that is absolutely fine. Oh, actually it is not very fine, because this allows us to win the knight, and I didn't see it before. But now I see it clear as day. The knight doesn't have any check again. We can offer the rook trade or checkmate. The black might have a last try to protect the rook and to counter-attack our rook, but after we trade on b8, it's basically a checkmate. So they just have to give the free knight and run away with the rook. So as long as you always take your time and look at some ways to activate your pieces when necessary, sometimes the extra advantage of a pawn might not be so significant. However, I believe, just to be fair, that the opponent today did not solve their problems in the best way they possibly could. So now starts the chase of the remaining rook. So we will double up our rooks so we can protect if they check us. We can also check the king, and so knight f5 is basically a resignation, as we will trade the rooks. This is forced. King has to go to g7, the only square. Now we need to be mindful of any checks. So there's a one check here, which doesn't mean anything to us. So we can play rook b7. The threat is to push the pawn forward. Also, the second threat is to play knight g5. This check doesn't mean much again, so we will just sidestep their possible threats. So if I play e6 straight away, they might have knight d6 counter-attacking the rook. So what I'm going to do first is to play rook to d7. This will also allow me to potentially trade their knights and also avoid any checks. And right now it looks like pawn to e6 is straight up winning, so we are going to go for it, not to worry about this pawn at all. If black takes here, then we are just simply winning knight. g4 is a possibility for them, of course, but we take here. This is gonna be maybe less instructive, but we're gonna take on f5 and can march the pawn forward. So that's the simplest way. So sometimes you might want to choose the simplest way of winning. So you just take the knight. There's many ways to win in here. One of the other ways was to play knight e5 check. I just want to show you. Knight e5 check. The king has to go away from... Oh, that was actually mate in 2. If knight e5 check, king has to go here, and rook takes f5 is a checkmate. So yeah, I could have spent a little bit more time thinking about this position, but this is what happened. So that's not a big deal. Sometimes when you see a winning moves, you don't need to think about any other moves as such. So we don't need to take that pawn. Everything is protected, and I don't know how disrespectful we can be today, but let's start with bishops. The opponent is not resigning, so we might as well go ahead with some bishop attacks. So we're gonna win the pawn first. So I'm gonna grab this pawn. The opponent will basically have only a couple of squares in this little tiny area. I'm gonna win another pawn. So we go here. So our customer has only a few squares left here. Can play bishop g4, g1, king e2. So they have this tiny little place to run around. And I think we will go with the classical checkmate with the rook and the bishop. which will demonstrate like the weakness of these squares. If you imagine these were two dark square pawns, so we're going to give a check, and the next move is a checkmate with promotion. You can use the rook, you can use the queen as well. Oh, it's actually might not be a checkmate. This, if I place rook now, that would actually not be a checkmate, that would be a stalemate. So need to be careful of those things. Black's only hope, so we will let them a little bit out of the chain here, and there. So king f1, pawn, exchange it for the rook. Once get tired of mocking our opponent. Our opponent is Abuiasha, Abuiasha, 1389, and they are from some sort of country that appears to be from Middle East. So we'll gain to our opponent. They shown definitely a fighting spirit after the game, where they have been under pressure most of the time, and they didn't resolve the opening the best way. They were very close to actually maybe getting even better position with taking on f3, but rook b8 really cost them the game. And it's understandable that sometimes this happens. As you were under pressure from the opening, then you slip up, and then the game just walks away from you, just like that. But I'm sure I had more than just a drawing chances, even when I was a pawn down, due to my slightly better development and this really annoying bishop on d6. However, they could have tried and get rid of that bishop. So sometimes when you have a piece that's really annoying in the game, you need to try and address it as soon as possible before that bind basically breaks your neck. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's game. I will see you in the next one.